Hello, 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 and welcome back to DLA Alternative. It's your boy Brandon, and I hope everyone is doing phenomenal as always. But yes, as you can tell by the thumbnail and title, we are going to be talking about the electricity in this show, and that might seem a little bit confusing, but the electricity in this show, no doubt in my mind, has a lot of importance and a lot of answers to the connection to the upside down and to the real world, being Hawkins. This basically is going to kick off this theory, okay? And this one is just going to be more or less just notices and questions that I have for you guys, and I want to know your thoughts before we get into the next part of this theory. And in the next part of this theory, we will analyze these scenes a lot thoroughly, and we will try and find way more hints. But let's get right into this one, because I noticed some things and I have some questions for you guys that I want to know your thoughts, like I said. But more importantly, let's talk about the electricity and the lights real quickly and what we know so far. Basically, in season 4, I want to jump all the way to season 4, chapter 7, the massacre at Hawkins Lab, when we see that Nancy and the group in the upside down actually are connecting with Dustin and the group in the real world through the lights, okay? And this is when we start to notice some things all the way in season 4, and we kind of get some hints of that all the way back in season 1, but we will talk about that towards the end. But my major point is that during this scene is when we finally get the notice, or our group finally notices, that the lights are being affected from the upside down and the real world, okay? And this is after the group that's actually at the Wheeler's house was found at Lover's Lake, and they were helping the other half of this group find the gate at Lover's Lake, okay? And the other half of the group is in the upside down, and we know this, okay? And they go to the Wheeler's house. And when they're at the Wheeler's house, they walk in, and Erica notices in the real world that the lights are acting a little weird, okay? And Dustin notices something, and this is when they're trying to figure out where that other half of the group is. And this is while they're having the conversation, and Dustin is explaining how they wouldn't be stupid enough to actually go into the portal, okay? But long story short, Dustin notices this, and he thinks of a plan, and he takes that light bright from Holly, okay? And I don't know if that has any importance at all. And we know Little Miss Holly Jolly is going to have a lot of importance in season 5 one way or another. But my major point is they take this light bright from Holly, all right? And they run up to Nancy's room and they do this theory, okay? And basically the biggest reason about how they're connecting right now is through sound, not through lights, because Steve was able to hear Dustin, okay? He was able to hear Dustin in the real world because Dustin must have been being loud or something. Or I actually have an idea that since the lights are on in the real world and we see them being affected, and none of those lights are on in the Wheeler's house in the upside down, they are being charged from the real world lights, and we know that, okay? But I have this thought that since those lights are on, okay, that's how they're able to hear in a way. That's how they're able to hear Dustin, because he's directly by that light that we see being affected, okay? So in a logical sense, there's a connection right here that the sound and these lights are connected in a way, and Steve's able to hear him, okay? And then all of a sudden we see all of this shit happen with the lights, and then that's when Dustin thinks of this plan to go up to Nancy's room and do all of this shit with the light brights. So no doubt in my mind there's a connection here, all right? And there's a connection through the lights and the sound specifically. But this theory is strictly based off of the electricity, all right? So basically they go up to Nancy's room and they do this light bright theory. And basically Dustin plugs that in, okay? And he charges that light and then turns it off. But the thing about that is that where they're at in the upside down in Nancy's room, there is no light bright there, but that light is still charging. So this proves right here that the light in the real world can even charge just an area in the upside down without there actually being a light there. So in my opinion, that's extremely important, people. So let's jump into the next part of this theory that's going to get even more interesting, and I have some more questions. But basically, now that we know all of this, okay, and now that we know that light in the real world can charge just an area in the upside down without there being anything there, let's jump to one of the very end scenes in season 1, chapter 8, the upside down, okay? And this is when Hopper and Joyce are going into the upside down to find Will. And one of the very first places they check is they check Castle Byers, but then they hear something, okay? And that's the Demogorgon getting put back into the upside down from what we know, all right? And that's because Nancy, Steve, and Jonathan are currently in the present in the Byers house fighting that Demogorgon and trying to send it away or trying to trap it, okay? But this Demogorgon obviously has its own way somehow of going in and out of the upside down or wherever it's actually coming from. So basically Hopper and Joyce hear that, all right? And they go to the Byers house and they end up going there and they go inside. And that's what I want you to keep in mind, is that this is what gets very interesting, is that they go inside and they have flashlights. So now in this scene, all the way back in season 1, we are seeing that light in the upside down can affect lights in the real world. So it's kind of the opposite of what we just talked about, all right? But there's a difference. And the difference is that these lights aren't staying charged in the real world, all right? They're just blinking and kind of leading the way like we see. And that's because we see Hopper and Joyce go in there and we don't see a Demogorgon, keep in mind. And they go through the back door past where Will should have vanished to in that shed, all right? Keep in mind. We don't see much about that. They kind of just walked right past it. And basically they walk inside and their flashlights being on light the way as they are walking through the house, okay? And then they walk back around out through the front door. And in that scene, we see those lights just flashing and it's leading the way as they are walking that way. But as that's happening, Jonathan, Nancy, and Steve notice this happening, and Jonathan can just feel like this is his mom, all right? And he even says that quote like, "Oh, Mom," and he calls to her, all right? And what we see in that scene, once again, is we see a connection to sound and light. Because Joyce hears his voice and she hears Jonathan's voice in the upside down. And once again, that's because those lights are lit. She has that flashlight on and it's charged and it's fucking allowing her to speak and hear into the real world. Or it's allowing Jonathan's voice to come through from the real world into the upside down. So there's definitely a connection here with the lights and the sound, most importantly. But there are some very interesting things that I noticed, okay, and that are very interesting about these two scenes differently. They are almost the exact opposite. And I say that because what we see in the first one is we see light in the real world being charged, and it charges an area in the upside down with nothing being there, okay? But that's the thing, and if you noticed, and if you're a Murray Bauman of the family like we have in the comments, and you know we do, so keep subscribing, liking, and following this journey and get us to 1K, people. But my major point is that we see Joyce and Hopper in the upside down, and we see the lights in the real world being affected, not being charged. And no doubt in my mind, there's a reason for that, because those lights are not there in the upside down, people. Joyce put those lights up after, okay? And she put those lights up after Will vanished. And we know from that scene with the light bright, Nancy figures out that the upside down is stuck on November 6, 1983, or at least moving very, very slowly, people. So no doubt in my mind, that automatically shows that there is proof that those lights should not be there in the Byers house. But during this scene, all the way back in season 1, we see this clear as day, that those Christmas lights are not hanging up in the Byers house in the upside down. We see them walking through the Byers house and those lights are not there, people. So therefore, this proves that those flashlights are charging something that are not even there in the upside down. So what does that mean for season 5? And does that have any answers, in my opinion? Does this have any answers to something that they could use in the real world or in the upside down in order to charge something in the real world specifically? Like, say if they put something in the upside down, like I've said in other theories, we talked about Dustin's Forever Clock and that they're using this radio in season 5. But the major point is we have this little hint of the sound and the light connection, like I said. And we know in season 5 they're going to use this radio station. But the major point is we don't see this radio station in the upside down. But if for any reason this becomes a part of this whole light and this electricity connection in season 5, all right, and our group starts to figure out that, oh, in the upside down, that there are lights that they can't see specifically, all right, that are in the real world currently, that those lights can actually still be being affected by light in the upside down, even though they can't see that shit in the upside down. So that, in my opinion, raises a lot of questions to season 5 and what's going to happen in the upside down and how it's going to connect to the real world. It obviously doesn't raise a lot of questions about the whole time loop problem and all that shit, but there are more things that will involve that in part 2 of this theory. And in part 2 of this theory, we are going to talk about all of those scenes involving Joyce and her Christmas lights specifically. But there are 2 major questions I want to ask you before we end this theory, because this was just a question-based theory so far. But the number 1 question I want to ask you people, all right, is number 1, we see this shit with the lights, and we're going to talk about this like I said. But my major point is at one point in time when Joyce is connecting to something, and I don't know if she's connecting to Will directly because of what I'm analyzing and thinking now. But my major point is now that we know that these Christmas lights, all right, are not in the actual upside down whatsoever. We know that Joyce connects with something, and like I said, I don't know if it's Will. But we know Joyce connects with something in season 1 using the Christmas lights. But those lights are not there in the Upside Down. So if this is Will, how does he know how to connect with her directly using absolutely fucking nothing? And as far as we know, Will did not get put into the Upside Down with a flashlight or any light source whatsoever to be able to affect those lights in the real world. So in my opinion, something else has to be connecting with Joyce. Now that we know the lights aren't there, we later see that Joyce writes that alphabet on the wall, all right? So logically, if those lights aren't there, that alphabet is also not there in the Upside Down. So how does Will connect with her, and how does Will spell letters? There's one little hint that maybe he could have figured it out. But the major question is he does not have a light source in the Upside Down, people. So that raises a lot of questions as to how is Will the one that's connecting to Joyce in season 1 using the lights. But there's one more question, like I said, as we analyzed in part 2 of When Will Was the Spy theory. So go give that one some love because I uploaded it late and it's affecting the views. So go give that one some love because that one gets interesting as well. And there's something I left out in that theory. But the major question is, people, that I want to leave you with this, is that in that scene, and When Will Was the Spy Part 2, we talked about the arcade scene and when Will has his first vision. And during that first vision, he sees that storm in the distance, and that's all we talked about in that theory. But there was one thing I left out, people, and nobody really said anything about it in the comments, all right? I want to know how these streetlights are on and being charged, and they are just on in the Upside Down when we know, or as far as we know, that the Upside Down has no electricity. So the big question is how are those streetlights on, and where is that power coming from in the Upside Down? But you might be thinking, why the fuck am I talking about this scene? Okay, this hasn't had any involvement with this theory whatsoever. Because in my opinion, that scene with Will all the way at the beginning of season 2 does connect directly to all the way in season 1, chapter 8, The Upside Down. Because right after we see Hopper and Joyce go to the Byers' house, right, and we see their journey through the Upside Down to go find Will, we see them walk through the town of Hawkins, okay? And then we see them get to the library where they end up finding Will. And once again, there's a lot of questions as to how Will even got into that fucking area in the first place. But the major question is, people, is I think this is the first time we see it, but let me know if there is another time before this. But I'm almost positive that this is the first time we see these streetlights on, okay? And we see these streetlights on as they're walking through the town of Hawkins. And these streetlights, in my opinion, look like they're leading the way to where Will actually is. And also, if you really look at that scene, it looks like there's a light source coming from somewhere in that library under the ground. But once again, we don't see anything involving that at all. We don't see any answers involving why these streetlights are on in season 1. We don't hear anything about it in season 2 whatsoever. And then also we have this bigger question as to how is Will spelling letters and connecting with Joyce with those lights when he has no source of light in the Upside Down. And as far as we know, he definitely should not. But the major thing is that I want you to keep in mind and keep a logical sense of is during season 1, Will is a 12-year-old boy that's probably scared out of his fucking mind, people. How in his right mind is he just sitting in that house fucking knowing what to do, and more importantly, connecting to his mother with these lights and spelling fucking letters, people? It doesn't make any sense, people. So let me know your thoughts about all of this. This was just part 1 of this series, and it was just to kick off some of these questions. So let me know your thoughts. It's your boy Brandon, DLA Alternative. I hope you like this one, and as always, we out.